Good evening, this is Goldie. It's Wednesday, September 29th, 2010, and I'm in a non-secure location. And if I leave any gaps in what I say, you might be able to hear the real crickets behind me. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. By the way, the email alert I send out each week has a transcript from the prior week's rant if it's easier for you to read it rather than listen to me. Let me summarize what I'll be talking about today. I'll be talking about abolishing the public education system. I'll talk about the commons in terms of gas pipelines, and I will again talk about the need for constitutional amendments to detach corporations from the teat of our taxpayer money and regulating power. I will talk about the drug war and the slightly changed message from the past week in the media. I was speaking with a friend of mine last Thursday. He told me his daughter, who's 28, is having another kid by mistake. On accident. Jesus Christ. She had her first child 6 years ago. That was a mistake also. She works at Chili's. My friend said he thinks everyone in the generation of 18 to 28 has no clue about life. I have to ask, where did people get this sense of entitlement that our society will provide for her children? Fox on September 28, 2010 in San Francisco showed that the city wants to pass a law to prohibit toys and Happy Meals, etc. Since the kids are making their parents take them to McDonald's to get the toys and have French fries, that's the reason they're going, is to get these toys. My God, control your kids. Give them condoms. Don't be an idiot. Okay, here we go. I got so upset at hearing that this girl was having another kid, I nearly made my head explode. And on a detox, that's no good. This past Saturday, I was at a party and mentioned the following. I say we abolish public education. I had several people comment that they thought it was just a progressive plot on my part to move a government program elsewhere. It's actually a goldy plot to truly tear apart the issue and find the real problems and discover what we as a society can pay for and how we pay for it. I'm tired of idiot kids having kids. Who the F does she think she is? Why does she get subsidized to have kids in the tax code? Why does she get student loans and federal grants? Why does she get aid to families with dependent children? Why does she get food stamps? Why does she get free public education? Let me answer some of the questions. In the old days, people lived to be only about 30 or 40 years. Children died early. We needed more kids out on the farm. Having more hands was a net positive. Well, it's no longer a net positive on society. These are just some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and no question is off limits. When the U.S. lenders call in the loans, we're going to have to take drastic action. We've been living high on the hog with plenty of fat for a long time. Well, those times are soon to be over, and I'm not saying this like Glenn Beck does, just to get more viewers. I truly believe it. I've ranted in the past about our declining standard of living since the 1970s, coinciding with the OPEC oil embargo. I've stated that things we take for granted like Social Security, increased property values, increased government services are going the way of the horse and buggy. So I was watching a documentary on free speech TV called Capitalism Hits the Fan, and the professor giving the lecture pointed out that from 1820 until 1970 in real terms, wages increased steadily. From 1970 until 2010, wages have been flat. The wage rise from 1820 to 1970 led to the skewed idea of American exceptionalism, or the notion that my children and my grandchildren will do better than me because we in America are special. Look at the declining standard of living another way. When I came out of college, even though my parents helped me a bit, I only had about $15,000 worth of student loans in 1983. I took 5 years off from school, worked, and paid back the $15,000. When I went to law school in 1988, I came out with about $15,000 worth of debt in 1990. I paid it back fairly quickly. If you go to college today and come out 4 years from now, the average parent will be able to help you a little. But if you go to Rice, you're going to come out with about $100,000 worth of debt. And if you go to graduate school, you will add $80,000 to $120,000 to that, for a total of $180,000 to $220,000. Your $10 an hour per hour job at McDonald's, a job at Chili's, a landscaping job, or a greenskeeping job won't even put the slightest dent in that debt. although clerking at a law firm during summers will help you buy some suits and the down payment for a new car. Just look at the difference of debt from when I got out in 1990 and when someone will get out in 2013. It shows you the declining standard of living. It's an example of that. And that's what the professor and I have talked about. Computers, competition from Europe and Japan, manufacturing jobs left, women moving into the workforce, wages dropped, and immigration, wages dropped, specifically from Central and Latin America, as well as the quadrupling of the price of oil by OPEC in 1974, are the reasons that wages are flat and the standard of living has stopped increasing. Although, as the professor ably pointed out, the wage increases that did not happen during that time were replaced by loans in the form of unsecured credit and a parallel increase in debt from the federal government to creditors overseas. So he gave those 5 reasons why we've had flat wages. Computers, competition from Europe and Japan, women moving into the workforce, and immigration. All of those things cause wages to stay stable. I've added that the quadrupling of the price of oil, that gigantic transfer of wealth to OPEC, also sapped whatever wealth was remaining. All right. Because of all of these factors, you cannot raise a child on one average income, or 2 average incomes for that matter, which means the cost of raising these children falls on us, the taxpayers. And what kind of jobs await these barely out of high school losers? Working at the Walmart? Since that job can't be shipped overseas. In my corporate imperialism rant, I showed how corporations have become detached from the U.S. government's policies. Excuse me. These corporations don't really care like they used to about U.S. policy, as they're everywhere, not just in the U.S. In Capitalism Hits the Fan, the professor showed that following the complete destruction of industries in Japan and Germany, those companies retooled and rebuilt with an eye towards competing with the #1 producer, the United States. When the oil shock hit in 1974, Toyota and Datsun came up with fuel-efficient cars. We did nothing. As companies realized there were cost benefits overseas, they started moving their manufacturing to where the labor was cheaper. Adam Smith's invisible hand occurred, which is good for the corporations, just not for the U.S. employees of these corporations. I've stated in the past, these jobs are gone forever. So what's left here? Sales of retail crap from Bed Bath & Beyond, trades, as long as it requires a restraint of trade license to pull a plumbing or electrical permit, service industry jobs, and lawyers. Now, if you can get an advanced engineering degree and maybe are able to invent, then there is a place for you in Silicon Valley. Otherwise, see ya. Therefore, we need to abolish public schools and go to some other system that is not centrally planned. I mean, it's clear that parents today are idiots, and they were educated 30 years ago. So it hasn't been getting any better, has it? My friend's idiot daughter hasn't even been taught that the amount of money required for bringing up the child just is not going to be available to her. Nobody's told her this. She's not been educated with a capital E. This is a major problem of the educational system in this country. We don't even have a clue what we're trying to teach our kids to do. They certainly don't know how to write. They certainly don't know how to add. They certainly don't know how to study science. Evolution has been stripped from Texas textbooks by idiot parents. They certainly don't know how to be tolerant of other cultures through social studies and empathy. Muslim references are being stripped from Texas textbooks, and don't even get me started on the intolerance of the parents as to the mosque not at ground zero. They don't learn anything from their parents, as though there's anything to learn from them. We already know that the parents are failing to make their kids do homework, pay attention, understand that they need a graduate degree to even make a decent living, and just shut up in class. So the parents for sure are failing the system. Okay, enough of that really radical theory of abolishing public schools. Let's get to some specifics with the broken nature of the current system. A thing that we know is broken with the system is the teachers' union, and for different reasons than you hear anyone talk about. For any of you that have listened to past rants, I have stated that there is a structural regulatory defect exemplified by the BP oil gusher and the recent Supreme Court decision in Citizens United that states that corporations and unions and other groups and organizations are persons entitled to free speech rights in the form of unlimited campaign contributions for political advertising. Such unlimited spending leads to the structural regulatory defect of the regulated writing the regulations. My theory is that we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United so that corporations, unions, and other groups are no longer persons, to prohibit regulators and other government employees from ever working for any regulated companies or unions, or the groups that they regulate, term limits for U.S. representatives and senators, and drastically limiting campaign contributions to individuals only, and no more than $100. The current regulatory defect obviously fosters and legally allows the disproportionate power of such contributors to influence decision-making and regulation writing. My theory states that even unions are the recipients of such campaign contributions paid for the benefit of self-regulation. That's what I call it. However, there is something broken or not working in the form of teachers' unions. We hear complaints that GM union members were overpaid. We hear it about Chrysler and Ford as well. We do not ever hear complaints that teachers are overpaid because of their powerful unions. We don't hear that complaint. I have to ask why. Since they give tons of money to political campaigns, they seem to not get anything in return, and they seem to be the only group that doesn't get anything. I got some input from a teacher, actually a professor, that the fault is in the bureaucracy of the school system. Maybe. Well, bureaucracies become their own animal, interested in perpetuating themselves no matter what their purpose is. This is true of all entities, public and private, churches included. It's just the nature of the beast. Just think, the teachers' unions are so dysfunctional that they can't even get outsized salaries from people that take their money and votes. Res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. It is broken. At least that portion of it. We can see that there's something broken there. So let's get rid of it. I mean, it's not like we're saying let's get rid of health care, because in that case, people die. In the case of getting rid of public schools, people don't die. We just get idiocracy, which is what we have anyway. This past week, I saw a couple of stories that were interesting and slightly related. Both were on Fox, and we need to look at the message and see how it relates to our study of unions. In the first, the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York has a union that is the Local 100. In this story, they showed how the union was opposing the $1 private bus ride company. I guess that's their name, the Dollar Rides. And actually, it costs $2, by the way. The story portrayed the union in an anti-competitive light, saying that the union was opposed to this private enterprise that was paralleling the bus lines that the MTA runs in Manhattan. I'll be honest, it did look anti-competitive. On this past Sunday, John Stossel ran a story on just how damaging this public union was in terms of pay, benefits, sick days, pension in comparison to private workers, not unions, not private unions. He wasn't comparing them to that, he was comparing them to private workers. I have to ask, what exactly are these hatchet jobs about vis-a-vis Fox? It seems just pure union busting. I understand that the education documentary does a similar hatchet job on teachers' unions, but for the reasons that you can't fire bad teachers due to them being in a union. I invite my viewers to go watch that movie, which is Waiting for Superman, and then let's really figure out what's wrong, because it can't be the unions. They're not even working right. They're not getting outsized salaries, so that can't be it. My Tea Party friend even wrote me an email about unions and their disproportionate bargaining power, and I quote, "I don't like unions, period, for the same reason that I don't like lobbyists, because any original good intent is gone and they are just corrupt, bullying lobbyists. I don't think government enterprises should be unionized because the union leaders can easily out-negotiate and otherwise influence the government employers to raise conditions, pay, pensions, etc., far beyond what a comparable private enterprise would be able to provide, since the private enterprise is going to have to provide all of these things subject to profitability, whereas the government enterprise operates with our unlimited funding and is easy prey for the strong unions." So even my Tea Party buddy, who's extremely intelligent, agrees with me, where we were saying that we don't like these public unions, but they're not getting a disproportion. They're not even getting parity with private unions. So he's even agreeing with me that teachers should be getting even higher wages, but they don't. Anyway, I'm glad that the country will be focusing a little bit on this issue due to the new movie coming out, Waiting for Superman, although it won't last long enough to foster any real change, which I believe needs to be drastic. Let's go back to the structural regulatory defect in the tragedy of the commons, which is the regulated writing the regulations. There's a New York Times article, September 25th, 2010. Gas blasts spur questions on oversight. And I'm going to read from it. At a Christmas Eve gathering in 2008, a natural gas explosion in a suburban Sacramento neighborhood killed a 72-year-old man and injured his daughter and granddaughter. Investigators determined that Pacific Gas and Electric was to blame for a leak, but federal and state regulators never cited the utility for safety violations. It was one example of what many experts and studies say is weak oversight of gas pipelines in the United States, a problem that has contributed to hundreds of pipeline episodes that have killed 60 people and injured 230 others in the last 5 years. Those figures do not include the final toll of the explosion of another Pacific Gas and Electric pipeline this month in San Bruno, California, that left 7 people, actually now 8 people dead, and more than 50 injured. And they are referring to that current pipeline blast in California, which was a natural gas pipeline explosion. An article in September 16, 2010, Austin American-Statesman runs with the comforting title of Government Seeks Tougher Pipeline Oversight After Blast. Well, you probably don't need to read the article to feel comfort that tough new regulations will be passed that will not be written word for word by the pipeline industry. I feel the comfort. Don't you? The article states that it won't even be considered until after the recess, and then there will only be a doubling of some fines and maybe 40 new inspectors. 40 new inspectors for all the pipelines that run through the country. Wow, incredible. I'm sure the industry didn't write that regulation. I call it a pile of crap. Or I also call it more of the same. And as I quoted Garrett Hardin from last week, it is the CCPP game. Commonize costs, privatize profits. The more that the gas companies can foist to us in our commons, the more privatized profits they have. Going back to BP, there's a September 14th, 2010 article in the Austin American-Statesman that maybe got past you. Its title is, Scientists Find Blanket of Oil on Sea Floor. I don't know how this can be, as I thought all the oil disappeared, at least according to all of the stories that we've been seeing and hearing since BP capped the well. As I've stated ad nauseum, I wish that the oil gusher had continued through these elections and through the inauguration of the new Congress. Then maybe something constructive could have happened. As it is now, everyone is shouting, give me cheap gas. My point here is that the Citizen United case is in full force and effect, with corporations donating hundreds of millions to re-election campaigns legally. Do you think there will be any change to regulations of these donors? Again, the problem can be summarized by looking directly at my solution, and I'm going to repeat it. A constitutional amendment stating that corporations and other groups are not persons entitled to free speech rights in the form of unlimited campaign contributions, term limits for senators and reps. Remember, we say that they're all incompetent anyway, so we might as well have incompetent newbies up there not worrying about re-election. No revolving door for regulators or anyone in government service into the industries that they regulate. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Give me these regulations, I'll give you a job. And contrary to Arianna Huffington's call for public funding of elections, a $100 maximum contribution limit by individual people only. All right. Sorry for always going over that, but I think that's the major problem we need to handle. Okay. Here's just a little side note here. Ahmadinejad was in New York this past week. He spoke to Charlie Rose in the UN this past week, and he spoke of American imperialism causing most of the problems of the world today. We in this country and Fox News mock him as a terrorist. Let me tell you something. If you read the current issue of the Texas Observer about the state terrorism in Mexico in the form of the drug cartel takeovers of cities, or watch Democracy Now!'s story of the systematic assassination of journalists in Mexico, all for the protection of our drug companies by keeping the drug war going, it is a travesty, and we in the U.S. support these state-sponsored terrorists. Don't say something following 9/11 like they hate us because of our freedoms. No, they hate us because of the death and destruction that we cause. All right, sorry. Let me tone that down a little based on some more recent observations. Californians are going to the polls November 2nd to legalize marijuana for recreational use. I've been constantly ranting that there have been direct associations referred to in the media between drug cartels, the drug war, and illegal immigration. And their message was, be very, very scared. I've asked my California friends to watch the media to see how many federal DEA dollars would be used to defeat this legalization effort. All as a part of my structural regulatory defect as to drug companies wanting me on Paxil, Oxy, or Vicodin, and not on weed. Okay, I was watching Drugs Inc. on Nat Geo, the same Nat Geo that puts out the propagandistic show Border Wars, if you've watched it. I was expecting the same old CNBC stories about drug cartels putting plants in U.S. national forests, booby-trapped with armed illegals tending the plants. Well, guess what? I was shocked to watch the Nat Geo documentary, and I have to say, it was pro-weed. Okay? I kid you not. At least that is my take from it. They said that marijuana is the linchpin to all of the cartels, and that violence that flows from that money, and that the violence flows from that marijuana money, intimating that legalizing the weed would eliminate a big part of the problem. They didn't actually talk about legalization, but they certainly said that the biggest part of the problem was the weed trade. I found myself yelling at the TV. A few days later on Fox, there was a story that was made ridiculous by the commentator. And I mean, like, smirkingly, a story about the legalization effort that was being opposed by the beer industry in California. It was an absolutely ridiculous story. Had the Fox commentators just kind of laughing and chuckling at the beer guys. Now remember, Fox never does anything frivolously. It's why I love those guys. So why? The administration must know that it's going to pass, due solely to overblown budget and taxing projections. And they're looking for cover to allow the legalization. I am shocked, but it looks like, as of right now, the elected officials are going against the wishes of the drug companies. We're going to have to watch it, okay? If California legalizes, however, watch the federal government keep weed illegal, and watch your next president, Sarah Palin, crack down on it again. It's just been really strange. That's all I'm saying. It's really, really strange. So I want other people to take a look at that Drugs Inc. if they can, and it looks totally different than that CNBC Marijuana Inc. Story. All right, here's a couple of message items. It was a Fox Republican message on September 26th, 2010. This is what they said. Watch us later as we report on the Republican Party's change in strategy, referring to the new contract for America. The message was that the incumbent Republicans should not be thrown out because they've changed their strategy. Okay, that was Fox's message. Here's another one on September 28th, 2010. They had a survey question. Do you believe that Congress should vote before the election on the extension of the Bush tax cuts or after? Classic case of how you phrase the survey question to actually doesn't even matter what the answer is. Glenn Beck was on Judge Napolitano's Freedom Watch, and you know how I've complained a little bit about his pro-religion stance. And while he sticks with the idea that the cornerstone of our country's founding was a belief and faith in God, upon Napolitano's urging, he does not reject atheists, and he again pointed out Penn Jillette, a libertarian atheist. He said that libertarians that have self-control are fine, as though he has the right to say to say that. He actually meant atheists that have self-control are fine. Does that mean that people that believe in God do not need self-control? I don't understand your argument, Glenn. This is, you're losing me here. I mean, you're doing good things, but you're losing me on that one. Like, if you're an atheist, you got to have self-control, and then you're okay. All right. Here's a couple of questions and comments I got from some fans. Regarding the regulations written by drug companies allowing drugs to be flushed down the toilets and the city of Austin paying for the cleanup. This was in quotes. "Shouldn't we tax you for flushing your old prescription drugs into my ski lake? You should know better." That was from a buddy of mine to me. I do know better. I didn't flush the prescription drugs. And the point is, we all are being taxed for the disposal of those. And I ask, isn't it more efficient to have the manufacturer dispose of the drugs and charge a slightly higher price for doing so, instead of cleaning it out of our drinking water at taxpayer expense? It's called an externality in econ, if you watched last week. Okay. From my Tea Party friend regarding the AM radio show I heard on the night of the hurricane, where these guys called the Supreme Court liberal because they did not like the decision in the Kelo case on eminent domain for purely economic purposes. This is in quotes. "I think you have misunderstood your Tea Party friend's comments in regards to the talk radio hosts. I happen to know he doesn't get his panties in a wad when you mention Republican or even teabagger or even panties in a wad. He only wanted to know how you decided these guys were Republicans, whether they declared themselves to be or whether you were profiling. Was the R word in your rant emphasized in your tone of voice, or was it a message word that triggered attention on the part of the listener? I guess we'll have to go back and listen, unless it's in all caps in your transcript." Okay. I'm not going to say his name. If someone uses the word liberal, they're automatically a Republican? This is his question. That's like saying if someone opposes Obama, they are a racist, or if someone is in the Tea Party, they are a racist. Okay, now take it easy, my Tea Party friend. I listen to these AM radio guys, and as I've said, my experience has taught me that Democrats only tend to say that they voted for Obama, however, ... That's what has occurred in my experience. When their Democrats have voted for Obama and they're going to complain about him, they say, I voted for him, however. Okay? If these guys, these AM guys, were Democrats, they would not have called the Roberts Court a liberal court. Because no liberal believes that, from my limited anecdotal evidence. They, Democrats and liberals, all believe that the Supreme Court gave the election in 2000 to George Bush. And the appointees only got worse from there. My point is that if you use a message word in describing something, anything, more likely than not, you are opposed to the message word types that you are describing. So if you say that healthcare is part of a socialist agenda, more likely than not, you're a Republican. And isn't it true that most Tea Partiers were and continue to vote Republican? And again, I'm not trying to say that is true, that Tea Partiers are opposed to it solely because they're Republicans. They just tend to be. My suggestion is, especially to Tea Partiers who I respect, that if you object to this label, don't use message words like liberal or socialist or Marxist agenda. Now, it's possible that these guys were Tea Partiers, that were Democrats in another life, but I doubt it. I'm talking about those AM guys. Okay. Another from my Tea Party friend regarding the historic district rant. In quotes, "I like the idea of flexibility for property owners, but it's the exact opposite of what the regulators, developers, desire. As you know, in commercial, cities continue to place more restrictions on use so that they can control what any area looks like. If we used Austin as an example, they passed design standards contrary to what most voters like, just as it's supposed to work in a republic. For those big Home Depot parking lots, they've tried to make them more mixed use and pedestrian friendly, also contrary to what the developers want to do, which is just build a big, cheap, ugly box. So locally, sometimes the big contributions are not a structural regulatory defect." All right, I just received a voicemail from a friend who was a bit bugged by last week's libertarian slant, and he asks, what about the unequal opportunities that lead to unequal pay and not even a living wage for people that provide essential services like janitorial? I assume he also wanted to include teachers and caregivers for the elderly. Well, my fine feathered friend, I've commented that there is something broken in the teachers' pay that we need to get at the heart of. As to janitors and caregivers, there are plenty of private, for cash, nursing homes that pay what they pay, unless they're unionized. I assume if you need to be licensed, you get compensated for that. If not, do another job or be a nurse, without commenting on the skewed nature of compensation for those in the healthcare field. As to being a janitor, seriously, anyone can do it. You get paid what you get paid. It goes back to my personal responsibility argument about having children. Why do we give licenses to people to drive cars but not to bring up children? If you don't have a plan for educating your child so they become a doctor or lawyer, don't complain that society does not pay enough to your son, the janitor. I just had a discussion with a friend of mine who threw back at me that our largest lender, China, will not allow its largest borrower, us, to go down. They won't foreclose on the Grand Canyon, is what he said. What he kind of said. Well, that sounds a lot like people that were buying model homes in Vegas in 2007. They'll never go down in value. Think for a second. It may not be up to the lender as to whether they call the loans due. And let's look at the really ridiculous example. At $100 trillion. When we get to that point, can we survive as a nation? No. So let's go ahead and cut some muscle out, since just cutting the fat won't do it. If you watch Capitalism Hits the Fan, you will see the breaking point has been reached with personal borrowing and government borrowing. We just can't spend back to the status quo, as the status quo is not 1965, it's 2007, and unsustainable. That's all there is today, unless my buddy has any questions here. I've got a little semi-producer. I'm going to thank my sponsors while he thinks up his question, which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of the conversation. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesis, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZitaDesign.com, ZITA Design.com for all of your decorative painting needs. She can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your plumbing problems and redos. TicoAdventureLodge.com, TICO AdventureLodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNCSurfSamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, great sunset restaurant in Samara. And Ambar Tequila at www.santospirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. And again, for Monica and Quinn in Samara, check out their little hotel at www.villablancasamara.com. Thanks and God bless. Unless we've got nothing, we've got nothing. Y'all have a great one. Thanks for listening.